Here's the recording of page 10 to 13, and we're going to start right here. How we keep track of the years. You probably know that when we call 10 years a decade, 10 decades equal 100 years, and we call that much time a century. 10 centuries equals 1,000 years, and we call that much time a millennium. How many years are there in 4 decades? How many years are there in 7½ centuries? The plural of millennium is millennia. How many years are there in 6 millennia? The words decade, century, and millennium are tools that help us measure time, but we need a starting point. Before we can use a map to take a trip, we must be able to find the place where we're beginning our travels. It's the same with time. When we want to measure it, we have to know where we are starting. You might say, what's the problem? We're starting from today. True, we know what the date is today, but how did we get to that date? When did people start counting to make today the date it is, and not some other date? In the past, people have used many different calendars, but most of them had different starting points. Today, most people use the same calendar, which measures time from the year when people thought Jesus Christ was born. That year was called AD 1. The letters AD are short for the Latin words Anno Domini, which mean in the year of the Lord. So AD 1 means in the year of the Lord, number 1. Notice that AD goes before that year. That's an old Latin convention, and it's still used today. Why, you may ask, is the calendar we use today pegged to the time of Christ's birth? It's because nearly 15 centuries ago, a monk named Dionysius Exiguus sat down and invented a system to keep track of years. In his day, the Christian church carried on most scholarship in Western Europe. So it wasn't at all surprising that this studious monk decided to make the birth of Jesus a starting point for his system of keeping track of time. Later on, other church leaders began using a calendar based on the year of Christ's birth. According to Dionysius Exiguus' system, that tradition spread and has lasted to this day. Sometimes instead of the letters AD, you will see the letters CE. Those letters stand for Common Era and are simply another way to say the same thing without referring specifically to Christ. The initials AD and CE are interchangeable. For example, the dates AD 1492 and 1492 CE mean the same year. In this book, we will use AD. So to recap, the calendar we use today begins counting the years from the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. The letters AD stand for the Latin words Anno Domini, which mean in the year of the Lord. Instead of AD, you can also use the letters CE, which stand for Common Era. When you use AD, the letters come before the date. When you use CE, the letters come after the date. You say or write AD 1215 or 1215 CE. Now, what about the years before AD 1? Millions of people lived before that time. We date those years by numbering them backward, beginning from AD 1. The year before AD 1 is 1 BC. BC stands for before Christ. Notice that we write AD before a number and BC after a number. To see how this works, look at the timeline in Figure 1 on the next page. Compare this timeline with a number line for mathematics showing positive and negative integers. Do you see a difference? There's no year 0 on the timeline. That's because the monk who developed the system began with AD 1. All the time before that was before Christ. So the first year before Christ became 1 BC. At times, instead of the letters BC, you will see the letters BCE. Those letters stand for before the Common Era. BC and BCE are interchangeable. For example, the dates 750 BC and 750 BCE mean the same year. In this book, we will use BC. Which of these dates is written correctly? 800 BC or BC 800? Human beings first landed on the moon in AD 1969. What does that date mean? World War II ended in 1945 CE. What does CE stand for? Julius Caesar died in the year 44 BC. What does BC stand for? What's another way to express that year? Okay, and then here's some figures with some timelines showing 1 AD and then 1 BC. And then we've got AD again with larger numbers. And then we've got centuries, both in AD and then centuries in BC. And as you can see, the numbers go backwards here. Let's look at a timeline that shows longer periods of time. Figure 2 shows centuries. Show where 800 BC is on the timeline, then show where these dates are. So 800 BC is going to be right in here. AD 400, AD 1250, 1125 BC is going to be back here. AD 975, AD 250, and then BC 300. How old are you? If you are 12, then you are in your 13th year of life. If you are 14, you are in your 15th year of life. Why? Think of newborn babies just a few weeks old. They are in their first year of life. On their first birthday, they begin the second year of their life. Still, we say they are only 1 year old. It is almost as if we were a year ahead of themselves. We number centuries the same way. Look at the timeline in figure 3. See how this works? So here's figure 3. So here's the first century. It's between 1 and 100. Then we're in the second century. 100 to 200 is the second century. All the years from AD 1 through AD 100 are part of the first century. All of the years from AD 101 through AD 200 are part of the second century. All the years from AD 1901 through the year AD 2000 are in the 20th century. What years make up the 14th century AD, the 9th century AD, the 6th century AD? Imagine you were born in 1992. In what century was that year? The same system is used for naming the centuries that came before Christ. See figure 4. All the years from 100 BC through 1 BC are the first century BC. All the years from 200 BC through 101 BC are in the second century. What years make up the 8th century BC, the 13th century BC, the 5th century BC? And that's where we will stop. So taking a look at time there. So that's the reading of pages 10 through 13.